Once you do that, you create a corporate culture of of indolence and sycophancy, which is terrible. Now, a lot of people know that the circumstances in which Africa finds itself uh, are not the best. Right now, the country from which I come from, which is Ghana, has got dreadful economic problems. Um, it's having great difficulty servicing its foreign debt. We're now at the cusp of possibly having to collateralize our current assets, our future wealth as a nation, so that we can uh, pay off our debt obligations today, which will, if basically, wind up with the country living as a debtor, as a borrower in its own country, as a renter in their own assets. Yeah, everybody complains about the leadership that the country is being offered. Everybody's worried that the politicians don't show sufficient integrity. Everybody's worried that corruption is a huge issue. Increasingly, people are worried about the freedom of speech. Increasingly, people are worried about the sheer competence of apparently very well qualified people in the roles that they're functioning in. And people wonder what the cause is. I won't belabor this point. I mean, this conversation is going on in every bar, every WhatsApp chat group, every Facebook chat group that's got Ghanaians and Africans in it. But the single biggest issue remains this: everybody wants the continent to change while they remain the same. By the way, this isn't a uniquely African problem. We have all manner of problems over here in Europe, which is where I live right now. And people are talking and saying that because of the difficulties we had with the pandemic, because of the loss of liberties, because of the increases in censorship, because of the resulting impact on our economic circumstances. And then, right after we came out of the drastic lockdowns and the uh, really very, very borderline um, uh, abusive control of our human rights in the way in which, we feared that the medications were going to be mandated, what happens? There's a huge conflict blows up in between Russia and Ukraine, in which the media are constantly ramping up the pressure on people as to how awful Russia's being, how badly Ukraine is being treated. Although, when you look at the facts, it's nowhere near as cut and dried as that. Whatever the case, we are all being kind of pumped up into a frenzy of uh, of panic and fear. So it is that a group called the Awakening Group is now asking for us to change our whole way of life so that we don't wind up with the slow tiptoe to a much more totalitarian way of being governed in Europe, which always touted itself as the very, what should we call it, example of civil liberties, human rights, and so on. Well, these civil liberties, these human rights are increasingly at risk, so that, say the governments, so that the crises that are being faced in the West can be managed. Well, the problem for Europe is the same as the problem for Africa, which is that a lot of people want there to be a change in Europe, but a lot of people don't want to change their mentality. A lot of people don't seem to understand that as long as they act in fear with a sycophantic following of people who present themselves as messiahs, as saviors, as philanthropists, and so on, that following them will give them, we the public, what we want. Until people can change this mentality, actually, we can't possibly expect there to be a change. So, as this broadcast is more about Africa and Africa's circumstances, I would say this: there is no way the changes we want to see are going to happen unless we ourselves are prepared to change. Now, if we are prepared to change from theory X of human behavior to theory Y of human behavior, theory Y being the guy who likes to take responsibility, the guy who has their own goals, the guy who has quite a lot of personal integrity, and the guy who is self-motivated as a starter, there is no way in heaven or hell we are going to acquire governments that will give us the environment for us to be that way. But the start doesn't come from the government. Look, if a government came along tomorrow and gave us all the most easy working environment without a change in the character of our way of doing things, the way we have become acculturated to doing things, I'm not sure we're going to get the change that we want to see. So if I am claiming that we can change the continent to make it what we want it to be, I'm saying that based on the proviso that we as individuals are prepared to change, because actually that change is totally predicated on how we as individuals, not so much the politicians, we the individuals are going to be. If you have a job with a responsibility, you're being paid to fulfill that job. Are you doing that job properly? Are you taking responsibility for that job properly? Are you doing it with a level of confidence? Or are you sucking up to your boss? Are you pandering to the person who gave you that job? Are you easily corruptible? Now, in that moment, I, Teta Kofi, can't come and sit there and make that call for you. Any more than when I'm in that situation, you, Mr. or Mrs. XYZ, or shall I say Ms. rather, XYZ can come and make that call for me. It's entirely up to me in that moment. And I believe that these changes start in tiny ways and move forward in small increments. But as sure as night follows day, if we change our mindset, the environment will come to reflect it. I really apologize if we've had some difficulties with the sound on this broadcast, especially in the first half. It makes me particularly sad because there I was telling the story of how I came to learn about Douglas McGregor, and it's really fundamental to the outcome of this broadcast. So thank you very much indeed for joining me. Please, for those of you who heard the audible parts of this broadcast, please share your comments. I'll just be taking notes. I'm not here to defend or to promote a thesis. I'm here to promote a conversation about my thesis, which is that if we change, we can change anything in our environment. Thank you so much for joining me.